Yo, I'm Kevin and I'm developing a game solo, and this month I want to start by wishing you an excellent new year. I hope that 2025 will be an even better year for you than the previous one. Initially, I had planned to start the year by working seriously on the visual aspect of the guest house, and last month I finished the recap by saying that for December I planned to complete the last VFX remaining for the combat. But I couldn't resist and got straight down to architecture modeling, and this month I'm going to show you my progress on the guest house part. The inn represents the hub of the game. Between each mission, this is where the player will unwind and relax, as well as manage the arrival of guests and perform daily tasks like cooking, farming, or fishing. In terms of level design, it will be a small map with 3 paths that cross at the center, where the inn, the main point of interest, is located. In terms of style, I want a fantasy-type architecture that incorporates elements of Chinese, Persian, and Turco-Mongol influences. One point I'd like to emphasize, I am not seeking historical accuracy or even cultural authenticity. Although the project is called Silk Road and is inspired by real cultures from historical regions of our world, the adventure in the game takes place in a completely fantastical universe. Even if I am fascinated by Central Asia, I do not want to make a game like Assassin's Creed with an ambition of faithful historical representation. While I am passionate about this region of the world, I am not a historian, and in any case, this region is far too complex with a multitude of vastly different cultures, and it would be incredibly ambitious to make a game that represents Central Asia in a respectful manner. For these reasons, I chose the path of inspired fantasy. The universe, the story, the mythologies of the game are creations from my imagination, an imagination fueled by years of personal fascination with this region. Since I started discussing the topic, let me add that the Silk Road project speaks less about Central Asia itself and more about the power of fascination this region can have on a person. For most people, the Silk Road inevitably evokes the perilous journey of caravans made up of long chains of camels in arid regions, and naturally that was the first direction I started exploring for my game. Something around a journey in a vast open world where the player would visit different cultures, but I quickly abandoned the idea considering the complexity of the project for a solo developer. Ultimately, I decided to take the opposite approach and place the player at the center of this universe, and rather than traveling himself, he would be the one welcoming travelers from the 4 corners of the world. Besides the advantage of being much simpler to implement technically, it also allows the project to be much more personal for me. The mere mention of names of ancient historical kingdoms such as Scythia, Xiongnu, Sogdia, Khwarezmia, Kushan, or mythical cities like Samarkand, Bokhara, Kashgar, Herat, or Turpan sets my imagination ablaze, and my mind starts to fantasize about what these places and eras might have looked like. These are the same reactions I want to trigger in the player by making them embody a character who meets and listens to the stories of people from different cultures. Thus, the game's purpose is no longer so much to expose a faithful representation of a region of our world, but to evoke the power of fascination that this region has on me. For those who haven't guessed it from my accent, I am a Frenchman living in Canada, and thus I have little to do with Central Asia. Therefore, for me, it is also the best way to evoke other cultures that are foreign to me without feeling awkward. Let's close this philosophical parenthesis and return to the discussion of the architectural influences of the inn. The inn is at the center of the imagined world for the Silk Road project, and the influences of the 3 surrounding kingdoms should be felt in the building's architecture. I first started by constructing the blocky of the inn to determine the building's layout. A blocky is a very simplified representation, often made with geometric shapes to make it as simple and quick to manipulate as possible. The goal is to validate the overall look and quickly get a sense of the in-game scale before spending more time on the details. I drew inspiration from the caravanserais found along the historical Silk Road. A caravanserai is like a motel placed at the exit of a highway nowadays, and historically they are presented in a square shape, with an interior courtyard surrounded by walls supported by wooden columns. My main source of inspiration is the oasis of Dunhuang in western China, at the edge of the Taklamakan Desert. Its main building is a pagoda with multiple layers of roofs. The closer we get to Persia, the more Islamic influence is found in the buildings, and for me the most recognizable element of this architecture is its imposing entrance walls where an alcove is carved. The domed roofs made of turquoise ceramic tiles are another discernible element throughout Central Asia. For Turco-Mongol influence, it's less obvious since historically they were nomadic peoples who didn't build many structures. However, the shape of their tents can always be a source of inspiration. Moreover, the domed roof has a shape similar to to the tents of the nomads of the steppes, and by decorating it with patterns and adding drapery and wooden stakes connected by ropes like the tent supports, I can incorporate nomadic tent ideas into my building. I explored several blocky designs, and this is the one I have settled on for now. I don't think I have found the final form, to be honest. I find that the building still lacks fantasy and seems too anchored in reality, but I chose to move on to the next stage anyway. I think it's still something that needs time to mature in my mind, and in any case it seems unlikely to find a final design now, considering I haven't scoped out the number of rooms or activities I will need. What matters now is having a sufficiently solid base for reflection on which I can work on the artistic style as well as the asset production workflow. Even if I am not yet certain of the shape and layout of the buildings, I am now fairly sure that I will want to have ceramic tile domes, pagodas, decorated wooden columns, etc. With that settled, I was able to start thinking about the best method for me to generate the most assets possible in the style I need as quickly as possible. And now you should be used to it and know what that means. It's Houdini time, baby! The goal is to establish a workflow that allows me to focus on the creative part, namely the design and development of shapes, and to find a way to automate repetitive or time-consuming tasks such as edge damage modeling, UVs, or texture baking. By the way, speaking of textures, I thought about the visual style I'm aiming for, and as I mentioned when I was working on the natural area with the Rainbow Mountains, the look I'm aiming for is a detailed style, but not cluttered. Even though I want more detail in the modeling than most stylized look found in other games which are too low poly for me, I still want to avoid high frequency noise. That means no micro detail normal maps or very noisy grimy dirt. I find that too distracting, especially for a look that seeks a bit of stylization. That is why I decided to drop the baked normal map for assets. Getting rid of a high-resolution map will allow me to free up GPU memory usage, savings that I can instead spend on using Nanite, Unreal's mesh virtualization feature that allows for displaying a much larger number of triangles. With Nanite, I should be able to achieve enough detail for the style I'm aiming for without needing to use normal maps. Speaking of detail, I spent quite a bit of time developing an auto-damage process in Houdini which automatically eats away the edges of a mesh with a single click. This will save me a lot of time, especially for more complex assets, as these were things I used to sculpt by hand. The tool in Houdini automatically optimizes the mesh by simplifying the geometry, removing invisible faces, and packing the UVs in the most optimal way every time the mesh is modified. I can even launch the texture bake with a single click without having to configure the baker or export and import the reference mesh. Everything is done within Houdini in the same window. By automating all these actions, not only does it allow me to create assets quickly, but it also gives me great flexibility. With the traditional workflow, once the mesh is sculpted and the textures are baked for an asset, it's challenging to modify the base geometry if you change your mind. Often it requires restarting a tedious process. With a non-destructive workflow like this one, if I decide later to change the shape of an object, the modification can be done in just a few minutes. Building this automation tool in Houdini took me several weeks of effort, but I will more than make up for the time invested later. Finally, I just started this month to explore adding an outline effect in Unreal as a post-process. The outline is based on the mesh normals to determine where to draw a line, and since the normals are not altered by a normal map and are therefore independent of texture pixel resolution, it gives me a perfect result. At least in theory for now, I still have some bugs to fix, but when it works, I find the result really cool. That wraps up my December recap, which ended up being particularly productive. Thank you, Christmas holidays. I wish you all an excellent year 2025 once again, and for those who haven't yet subscribed to the channel, why not start the year in the best way by clicking the bell and wishlisting the game on Steam. The link is in the description. Thank you all for your support. 2025, let's go!